She was born on the Lower East Side of New York City when it was still a tough neighborhood. Her stories and dramatic works have been published in several anthologies and literary reviews. She writes, shoots, and works a day job in New York City. Fucking Him, a video collaboration with Adrian Garcia Gomez, won Grand Prix at Interference Poland and had its U.S. debut at the Queens World Film Festival. You can find her at myprivateconey.com, Miss Claire Olivia Moed, and The Definition of Crazy.
I don't know if I can describe in 5 minutes what it was like to have a mother like Florence. I grew up underneath her Steinway piano, hours and hours of huge notes raining down on me as I curled up on a pillow waiting for her to talk to me. She rarely did. She just played all this heartbreak and grief, and every once in a while she spit out "son of a bitch" in between the notes. Her rage and her sadness drowned me so much that I was an adult before I got it, that happiness didn't only happen in a big musical number with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Years later, in her doctor's office, black eye, damaged wrist, bruised back, out of nowhere, Florence said, "You know, I'm really glad I had my piano. Otherwise, I'd be in my cups all day." Adolescence was a toss-up between the stomachache before school, terrified of the tough kids who were going to push, punch, and grab newly emerging breasts, or the stomachache coming home, terrified of the storms that brewed in her all the time. Whether we were on an errand to the supermarket or at home minding our business, Florence could explode anywhere. Screaming accusations I had no idea of how to answer. Perhaps she was suddenly reminded that her life was crammed into small coffins labeled mother and wife and piano teacher, but none of them had her name. Who the hell wants to be buried alive like that? Who wouldn't scream, desperate to dig themselves out of an unmarked grave? Yet, sometimes home was also filled with her encouragement. I write anything I want, and I read anything I want. Too big to curl up under her piano, I curled up in piles of books that very few would read until their high school or college teachers forced them to. And in the days when women entombed themselves in corsets, in rigid corsets that could survive nuclear war, and wore stockings and full-face makeup just to go to the supermarket, Florence only wore jeans and sneakers and maybe some lipstick. She also didn't dye her hair black night, blood red, or platinum blonde. It was dark brown and speckled gray, and she stood out miles away. Compared to any lady in a 20-block radius, Florence looked a bit crazy. Still desperate to fit in, I collaborated with the tisks, all my shrugs and eye-rolling and loopy grins, hiding shame that Florence wasn't like all the other corsets in our small corner of Lower Manhattan. Once, in a local election, I handed out flyers for the man running against the first woman candidate. A radio talk show host, he was in love with the sound of his own voice, but not much else. The woman candidate was worried about our schools going down the drain. But all the neighbors were voting for him, and it was so great to be part of the cool crowd for once, until Election Day, when Florence, like Moses at the Red Sea, parted the entire neighborhood waiting to vote and went up and shook the woman candidate's hand, who then went on to win big. It was only years later that I saw a bit crazy also meant unafraid to stand alone and be a leader, not a follower. Still, even as an adult, I struggled with how the world saw Florence. Like when two very well-dressed audience members at a rare concert Florence gave gossiped in front of me as I poured them their complimentary white wine. That Florence, you know how she gets. I was stunned by their smugness at Florence's refusal to don affectations that squeezed the life out of everything, and only briefly enjoyed their embarrassment when they realized that the wine pourer had the same cheekbones as Florence. Yeah, I should have given the same ass kicking that Florence gave every single mugger who tried to grab her purse, but I didn't. I crumbled into my own shame and said, yeah, no, I do know how Florence gets. But these days, I stand tall. The indelible gash left by a colleague who once called my mother a wacko doesn't haunt me anymore. A brilliant comedian, this colleague made her own parents' bizarre behaviors, even their heartbreaking losses, look cute. She flung their antics around as she sailed on their bankroll to fame and glory. My mother, in her 60s and 70s, trudged from apartment to apartment with bags of music, giving $20 piano lessons that coaxed bitter children and desperate adults onto ivory keys. But when she got home, she could still make Chopin and Debussy weep from their graves on that Steinway piano I grew up under. The one, as a young woman, Florence bought for herself, eating one meal a day for years, and in the summer, earning shit wages and big tips, serving rich folk in fancy resorts. I do know what it's like to listen to 200 phone messages crammed onto a bunch of cassette tapes. Those messages were better than any whiny, crappy play or movie I suffered through. Florence wasn't whining. She was getting back on her horse over and over and over again, losing her memory, losing her taste for food, and then losing her ability to read music. Until all she had left was a video of Singing in the Rain, the radio broadcast of Temple Emmanuel Friday services, and the NPR American Songbook show. And even then, she kept getting up every morning determined to defy the reality that was eating her alive. And when she couldn't get out of bed, she grabbed my hand so she could keep marching. I don't know how to describe in 5 minutes, and I don't know how to describe in 5 millenniums what crazy and wacko and you know how Florence gets means. I can't describe the raging mountains of words that destroy me repeatedly or what it felt like every day to drown in grief and sadness. But tell me about the time you stood alone to change the world. Display your scars from fighting for your life, be it from muggers or words that crush you into a living grave. Play me one piece of music that is completely unafraid to admit that vast longing to be loved and the heartbreak when you're not. Do all that, and I'll show you the definition of my mother, Florence. Thank you.